again on Freestylin LSD. Well, today it's actually at ORD. We're out at O'Hare today. I'm here with Kevin Coval, who really needs no introduction from me, but I'll give him one anyway. Poet, playwright, mentor, organizer. Is there anything you don't do, man?
Man, I don't do a lot of singing because I'm trash. So, yeah.
Same, for sure. All right, so where can people find you? What do they need to know?
Yeah, man, just at Kevin Coval on all the internets, Twitter and the gram. And yeah, I mean, Young Chicago Authors, at Young Shy Authors. Folks should come out to 1180 North Milwaukee and see what we're doing there. And then, I got this book, People's History of Chicago, that I'm continuing to run around with all year long. And so, from March 4th, 2017 to March 4th, 2018, I've been doing 180 readings in 365 days, one in every neighborhood. And so I appreciate you, hooking up the O'Hare reading, I guess, of sorts. You know what I mean? So we'll see. Hopefully, we don't get knocked for filming on these parts. Yeah.
So let's go ahead and jump into the first piece. You want to intro it? Tell us kind of what we're about to hear.
Yeah, man. This is so there's 77 poems in the book, and this is one of them. It's I thought I'd read it because this is just like running around in a car and like talking over breakbeats is like how I grew up, and so this is kind of about that era and that crew that I came up listening to. So this is called Moment Beat Tapes.
All right.
Moment Beat Tapes were copped from gramophone. Cassettes jammed into the factory issued stereo deck of the hoopty. I rolled around it, no offense.
True.
Nah. A bucket, bass and drum looped with some string sample fixed. A sliver of perfect adjusted. There was so much space to fill. An invitation to utter. Iqra, Allah said to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. A to B side and around again. A circle, a cipher. I drive down and back of my mom's Dodge for these latest volumes of sound. I'd stutter and stop and begin again, lonesome and on fire. No one I knew rapped. So I'd recite alone to myself on Clark Street, freestyling, shaping my voice, a sapling, hatchling, rapping, my life emerging in the dark of an empty car. There was a time when hip-hop felt like a secret society of wizards and wordsmiths, magicians meant to find you or that you were meant to find, like rappers I listened to and memorized in history class talk specifically to me, for me. And sometimes you'd see a kid whisper to himself in the corner of a bus seat and you asked if he rhymed and traded a verse like a fur pelt, trapping this gold or food, this sustenance. You didn't have to ride solo anymore. Jonathan was the first kid I met who rapped. He was black, from a prep school, wore ski goggles on top his head and listened to the Wu-Tang Clan, which meant he only rhymed about science and chess. His pops made him read Sun Tzu. His man's Omega, a big Puerto Rican kid, wrote graffiti and smoked beaties, and they'd have friends, and the backseat would swell, and the word got passed, scooped like a ball on the playground, and sometimes you take what you were given and lift off like a trampoline, and sometimes you trip, not quick, words stuck on loop like that, but breakthrough, mind knife sharp, mind darts polished and gleaming. We'd ride for the sake of rhyming, take the long way home, wherever we were going. We'd cruise down Lakeshore, back again, blasting, blazing, polishing these gems, just trying to get our mind right.
Hey. Excellent. All right. So let's talk about that piece for a second. So first of all, not being from Chicago, I know the name of the Moment.
Yeah.
But tell me about them a little bit.
Yeah, man. This was I think an all Latino production crew who I knew because they worked out of Gramophone, and they did a regular yearly show at the Metro called Chicago Rocks, and it was a celebration of Chicago hip hop, and it was the generation or two before this moment where, to be a Chicago hip hop artist meant that you had to go through a lot of bullshit. It was Chicago at that time was Haterville. This was still very much a house community, and the Moment really put on for a whole scene, and then fed kind of that 90s boom bap, almost like Pete Rock type, DJ Premier type, really lovely, lush soundscapes to some of the illest rappers of that generation. So they produced for Juice and Vakil and Prime and some Cap D, and then they did a lot of their own just compilation records and were really dope. And so, but they put out these instrumental cassette tapes, and it was just like, you know, the next in the iteration of shit that they were working on, and we, you know, I would like clamor for them, and I mean, I started out writing because I thought I wanted to rhyme, and you know, I was trash, but it was fun as fuck to like cruise around to a moment beat and just freestyle and just like have fun and like understand how language worked and bent and what like the nature of like the sound of each syllable could be, and you know, that was like my own like poetic proving ground. And so they would put out the tapes. I would run to gramophone records and get them, and in a lot of ways I think in that era especially, you know, hip hop introduced me to, you know, my community, you know, like every homie, every you know, brother, every like, you know, like chosen family member I ever had was because of hip hop, and you know, it was just that era where hip hop was not yet pop culture, and so you could tell, like just riding, you know, the CTA or whatever, like who listened, and you know, you just like. Yeah, you just like, until you like, you know, you just recognize it, like, yo, hey, and then you know, I would end up just talking to people. I don't know, what year were you born?
85.
Okay, yeah. So there was the starter jacket era.
Oh yeah, I had starter jackets when I was a kid, for sure.
You know, I always desired them, but they were, you know, one, they were really expensive, and but also. You know, in Chicago, like there was this era. I used to see him all the time, like off Maxwell, the old Maxwell Street, like the real Maxwell Street. You know, my pops would cop produce from like Western fruit and you know, vegetable markets, and he would just let me wander down on Halsted, and that's where I got involved in like, you know, a bunch. That's where I like first saw like 3-card Monty players, and you know, there'd be folks selling like. You know, bootlegs and bootleg tapes, bootleg bags, bootleg belts, everything, you know.
Street hustle.
Yeah, yeah, but then also they had all these like wholesale stores, and you can get anything. On Sundays you can get anything. They had the flea market, but during the week they also just, you know, they had these like beautiful like sportwear stores, and so the starter jackets hung in the window like these shiny like emeralds, you know. And so this is kind of about that era, but in Chicago a lot of people were getting got for the starter jacket, you know. And so the police, this begins with a quote from Jet Magazine on May 11th, 1992. They said, in Chicago, police created a whole new crime category, the starter jacket murders. So this is called Fresh to Death, summer of 92. Starter jackets were the coldest second skin. They'd glitter in the wholesale windows of Maxwell Street storefronts like flags or primary colored emeralds. Shown from black poets on Yo MTV Raps, there was Chicago, Hornets, mascots, cities emblazoned on the chest like tribal tats, religions, gang affiliations, clean sport cuffs and collar, snap buttons and sheen. The coldest wore them even in the crisp air, open, airing rope gold and white tees, a coat perfect for the fall. So much loot, you get slapped just for thinking about asking your mama for one. Oil slick arms just out of reach like everything in America. So cold it seemed reasonable. This could be the ocean of satin someone might die over.
So yeah, as far as that time period in Chicago, what was the Chicago music scene like in 92, 93 around that time?
Yeah, man, it was emerging. You know, this was the time when again, like I think so many young people were attuned to house music. In order to even hear breakbeat, you had to go to house parties, which was great because I think house had this really beautiful, open, and vibrant spirit. And house was uniquely Chicago, and so I think, you know, Chicago MCs, Chicago, you know, b-boys in some ways like emerged in a different cultural space a little bit oftentimes. And you know, in the 90s, early 90s, I mean, this was also a time where I think there was so much freedom to explore and create a style. Of course, you had the influence from what was coming from New York, but I think young people here felt like, okay, well, shit, let me see what I can make. And you know, in some ways, I think Chicago had a lot of different scenes at that time. You know, you young people, you know, out west and far south and north, and everybody just trying to figure out what they could do with this form. And so it was exciting. I mean, I think that there was a lot of division because the city was so segregated at the time, and a lot of, you know, Chicago in that era was kind of known as, like, I think Chicago's hip hop scene was, you know, it was like Haterville, or some like crab in the bucket mentality, because there was so few folks who were really beginning to get a national shine. But you know, you had folks break through, like Twista, obviously, and you know, Common, you know, dropped the second record, you know, in '94, and that put Chicago on a different kind of trajectory. I also tell the story of that record in the book and how much it meant to us, I think, here, because it was, you know, streets and people and schools that we knew on record.
Yeah.
You know, and so
not just hearing about New York and LA.
Exactly, exactly. But you got to hear about Cottage Grove and Stony Isle and Kenwood and Whitney Young, and that was significant. And I think in some ways, like, you know, Common really shaped a trajectory for the next iteration and the next generation, and then Kanye after him, and now I think you see the moment that we live in now. And but I think it comes from, you know, these you know, Chicago, you know, trailblazers, and the moment, and that generation of folks that I came up listening to, and, you know, eventually being in similar, you know, spaces with. I think, like, you know, like, everybody stands in a legacy, and everybody stands on the shoulders of giants. And I think this moment in Chicago hip hop is, you know, constructed in part through some of the innovations and sacrifices that era made. Well, yeah, man. I mean, just I guess to keep it like all the way hip hop. I'm going to read this. You know, a few years ago, I wrote in 2012, in the summer of 2012, I wrote a whole chapbook about Chief Keef. It was called "More Shit Chief Keef Don't Like," and it was kind of like an answer to all of the. I think people were beginning to scapegoat him for the violence in the city, and as opposed to, like, understand the systemic reasons that violence occurs, they were pinning it on the shoulders of a 17-year-old young man. And so I felt that was, like, you know, problematic, and, you know, obviously, you know, wildly inaccurate. And so I wrote this whole collection of poems, and this is the one that kind of made the book. And this is called. It also, it has this. It has a picture of Keef. There's 18 illustrations in the book, and this comes from Bianca Pastel, who's a really lovely, you know, visual artist in the city. And so she, you know, she got 3 illustrations in here. This is of Keef and the money phone. This is called Chief Keef's Epiphany at Lollapalooza, August 4th, 2012. From stage, he can see thousands crowd surf in a gated Grant Park, land stolen by those who mosh pit. His whole camp faces the Great Lake, eyes on the prize on water some have never seen. Heat rises from the ground like fire in the brush, in the streets. Thousands of hands, bodies bounce around every word, mouth every word, pink mouths around every word, pink mouths around every N-word. More shit he don't like.
Yeah, like, he is the scapegoat for a lot of what's been happening, like, in the media and stuff like that. And like you said, like, he's a kid. Like, does he bring some of that on himself by the way, at least he used to, like, carry himself? Like, you know, riding 4-wheelers around the front lawn of a house.
Well, I think that's just hilarious. You know what I mean? I think that's amazing. And in some ways, I think, like, you know, knowingly, you know, I think there must be a sense of, like, just rebellion, you know, of a sense of disrupting, you know, the normality and of you know, this whack social order. Yeah. And, you know, I mean, we have to remember, like, you know, Keef has been a part of a, you know, this you know, a part of the prison industrial complex in the city of Chicago and beyond. And, you know, his whole life, it seems that there's been a, you know, an institutional, you know, reach into his life to, you know, harm and shackle his body. And, you know, police shot at him, and you know, and he shot back. I mean, you know, that's why he, you know, it's one of the reasons why he went to jail at some point. And it was, you know, it was rumored that he was dead. Like, people thought that he died. And part of the reason why his fan base was so excited is that, you know, when he, you know, one of the reasons he got on, if you remember that, I think it was a World Star video where like this little kid like found out that Keith was still alive and got very excited, and that went viral and aided his own infamy in some ways. And you know, I think that Keith is like really, you know, incredible. I mean, musically, melodically, I think he's, you know, you look at, you know, where hip hop is now, and he, you know, was starting to put out this kind of, you know, melody, you know, blues and, you know, infused, you know, rap in what, 2010 or 09, something like that. And you look at where it's now. I mean, it's funny because I think, you know, just the way cycles work, if maybe Chicago was, you know, focused uniquely on listening to maybe like Atlanta snap or trap music, and then filtered it through, you know, what became known as like a drill scene, and now it seems like all of those like South Florida, you know, kids are listening to what Keith and his, you know, peers were making, and then translating it through their own scope. I think, I mean, in some ways it's about young people being excluded, you know, about institutions failing them, and I think there is a significant, you know, through line between all of those musics, and I think someone who works with young people is like, we have to really, you know, be, you know, increasingly more thorough and empathetic, and understand, like, if a kid is involved in whatever, you know, the young person's involved in, that doesn't mean, you know, in some ways it's like either like it's because they've been failed or harmed, and it's on us to then also just hear them out. This also got a illustration by my guy Paul Branton, Urban Mental on the gram, super dope visual artist. This is called Common's Resurrection, October 25th, 1994. We just celebrated the anniversary of that record. Beloved, know how amped we was. The first time the culture rooted in Chicago stories and slang. Locales our own, on the bus to touch home. Here, the names of streets we knew. Ran, a young man we'd seen off Cottage, at the Jam, heard on WHPK, sounded like the city we loved that will never loved us back. Sounded cold like he had one, on wax for the whole country to hear, an international megaphone a dozen years after the message loud and clear. The children of Gwendolyn Brooks are rappers. His pops played ABA ball, mom's the doctor of education, a Chicago son speaking what we knew. Andre Hatchett, Carfair, Jewtown, Stony Isle, DJ Ferris, Leon's Barbecue, high schools we went to, fought with, played against, girls we hollered at, the greatest extended metaphor hip-hop ever wrote. Monuments for what was, is here. When mad was tall and fat was cold. We loved Twister, who rapped so quick we needed a translator. D.A. Smart, Fast Eddie, the Super Bowl Shuffle. A slew of graffiti writers who went to war with Mayor Daley. But Common put Chicago at the intersection of the culture. Made Ice Cube an actor. Mike on vinyl. A ring you could hear in the Sweet Gums and Sycamores. Footprints in the sand at Lakeshore. A blueprint for the many to come.
Excellent. Alright, so I think that's the end of our episode today. Kevin, thank you so much for doing this, man. It was very cool to ride around with you.
Yeah, man, thank you. It's cool.
Actually get to you know, chop it up with you when there's not 300 people like, trying to get your attention in places.
Yeah, man, thank you. This is a great series, man, so thank you. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Alright, and that's the end of the episode, and we will catch you next time.